Today I'm here to talk about the dark things that I've been reading over the holiday season. I hope you've been having a good holiday regardless of how you celebrate. And for me, I really enjoy over the month of December reading a bunch of dark and creepy stories, whether they be thrillers or mysteries that all involve the holidays. I'm not a Grinch, I actually really enjoy the holiday season, but a lot of the books are just too cute and sweet for me in terms of all the holiday romances. So I always seek to combine my love of dark things with my love of Christmas, and these are the books that I read this month. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk about the 12 Days of Murder. And this is a mystery thriller that follows a group of friends. Back in college, they had this yearly tradition at Christmas where they would get together and do one of those murder mystery parties. The idea where everyone puts on a persona and there is kind of a fictionalized story. One person is a supposed murderer and you have to talk to the other guests and figure out who is behind it. Within the story, they are once again meeting again years later for a reunion party to do this kind of thing all again. The last time they did it many years ago, someone at the last party went missing. It was long believed that that person simply took off, disappeared, and never told anyone. However, when they go to do the party again, someone is then murdered right at the beginning of the story. And so there is a question of not only what happened all those years ago, was that other person also murdered? And then of course, who is doing the murdering now? So as someone who loves these kind of stories, I love this setup. This is right up my alley. These are the kind of stories that really appeal to me because basically, if you actually look at the structure of this narrative, it reads and plays out like you are experiencing a murder mystery story yourself. So I am hesitant to use the word thriller to describe this one because it is very slow paced and very character driven. But again, that is how it mirrors the actual murder party. Because again, if you've gotten to attend one before, you know that you have to talk to the other guests and everyone kind of has their little clues and their little spiels. And we as the reader are slowly learning the perspectives of all the different characters and kind of figuring out how they piece together. So reading this one, some sections I found more interesting than others, some characters I found more interesting than others. I was never ripping through the pages like I have with other stories, but I was interested enough to keep going. I did want to see how it all played out, and I overall really enjoyed it. So if you kind of share my love for those kind of parties, if you want to have a somewhat similar experience, maybe you're like me and wishing you got invited to more of those parties and you don't, so instead you kind of have to live vicariously through these characters, I thought it was a fun setup, something a little bit original. This book mixed in some of the Christmas spirit, but definitely it's a book that you could read really any time of year, any time in the winter. So if that sounds up your alley, I hope you check it out. Next, we have Christmas Present by Lisa Unger. And this is a short thriller that follows a woman who has a difficult past. You find out that she is the lone survivor of this murderer who killed her best friend. She is now as an adult trying to move past that. She owns and runs a bookstore. Right at the beginning of the story, there's a man who comes in to visit her. He is a crime fiction writer and he wants to tell her story or explore the history of her past. She of course is reluctant to do so, but they end up getting wound up into that and the story goes from there. In terms of a classic setup, this one is tropey. It hits on those classic beats, especially things you see commonly in thrillers today. So in terms of narrative and plot, I don't think this book is doing anything I haven't read before, but it hit a couple different pieces that really worked for me. Again, I was purposely seeking out stories that had that kind of holiday theme to it, and this one again was lightly sprinkled throughout, so you kind of get those references along the way. And I am a sucker for the journalist perspective coming in to help someone with their case, going back and looking at what happened before, reevaluating it. If you look at some of my favorite thriller books, you'll see that these are themes that I enjoy and read over and over again. So it wasn't the freshest book, it wasn't the newest book, it didn't change my life, the ending didn't rattle me or anything like that, but I had a pretty good enjoyable time reading it. I don't think it's the most special book, the characters were fine, the writing was fine, all of that. But did I read it entirely through? Did I enjoy my time with the book? Yes, so I would cautiously recommend it just as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. Next we have Sherlock Holmes and the 12 Thefts of Christmas by Tim Major. This is a book that was sent to me for review from the publisher Titan Books. And this, of course, is a retelling or reimagining of the character of Sherlock Holmes. I talked about in recent videos that I've really been enjoying their work. And I have also been enjoying going and experiencing other authors in the modern day that are rewriting this character. Now, I will give the disclaimer, and I think most people say this, that I don't think anyone will have done it as good as the originals. And so in comparison to those ones, I think anything you do now has to be considered or evaluated at at a lower step, and I would say that for this one as well. It definitely draws from the similar ideas. You have Watson and Sherlock and the mysteries and so forth, but it's just never quite the perfection of the classics. And so within this one, we follow Sherlock. It's set in winter around Christmas, and right at the beginning of the story, you have contact with Irene Adler, who sends him off on this Christmas-like challenge. And so I really like her as a antagonist, for lack of a better word to describe her, very much playing cat and mouse with Sherlock Holmes. And so you follow him as he's trying to go through and follow the clues. Within the story, there is also what actually should be going on, which is the fact that Sherlock has a new client who is getting death threats, and so he wants Sherlock to investigate. Within the story, Sherlock is very much distracted by what Irene Adler is doing, and I would say that I, as the reader, was also distracted. I found myself far less interested in the supposed main plot of the story, and I think that's honestly done on purpose, so I don't mean that to be a criticism, but the time spent puzzling through those clues were far much more interesting, and I just didn't really care about who was giving this poor guy's death threats. So just kind of go into that one knowing that, again, you're just spending time with the characters and familiar faces and so forth. I like this one. I do think that there are other authors in my mind that have captured the spirit of Sherlock Holmes a little bit stronger. I didn't find this to be the strongest representation of this brilliant, eccentric man, but I still enjoyed it. It was still cozy, probably one of the sweeter stories I read this month. So if you're looking for something like that, you might want to check this one out. Next, I read I'm Half Sick of Shadows by Alan Bradley, and this is a book in the mystery series that follows the young girl protagonist Flavia de Luce, who wants to be an aspiring chemist. In the story, it's not the first one in the story, but I could argue that you can definitely jump in here because, as far as I can tell, the books are quite episodic. So within this one, it is set around Christmas, and she is trying to find a way to trap and ensnare Saint Nick or Santa Claus. And so we follow her within the story. It's kind of fun because she is both aware of the myth and still wants to buy into it in a way that I think is very believable for the age of her as a character. And so I really enjoyed those Christmassy elements. There was also the major plot or mystery going on where there is this film crew that is coming in, and of course there is a murder and so forth. And once again, it's kind of a story where the Christmassy kind of fun parts of it were more interesting and kind of a distraction from the overall mystery that was supposed to be in play. So I'd say her trying to catch Santa Claus was far more fun than the actual story going on, but I enjoyed those bits. I think it's really hard to do a smart young protagonist right. I find them often very annoying, and while I was not in love with Flavia de Luce, I do think it's better than a lot of other ones. So she didn't really grate me the wrong way or rub me the wrong way in a way other people do. So I like this one. She's very smart and precocious, and particularly I really love the parts involving the use of chemistry to try to solve and puzzle things out, which I think for most readers is really what you come for, is having this little brilliant mind trying to puzzle things out and get to those solutions and learning a little bit about chemistry along the way. And of course, this book is set back a little bit historically in the past, so you get to learn about the understandings of chemistry back then and using the tools that were available to her. So I like this one, but I will be honest, it was a little bit sickly sweet for my taste. If you see my taste and what I'm normally looking for when it comes to dark thrillers around Christmas, this one was a little cozier than I like it to be. So I kind of got a bit to the cozy side, and then I steered back to my usual reading taste. So to swing back to the darkness, I also have The Gift by Freida McFadden. This is actually a short story, something I don't normally review on my channel, but this one was super buzzy. It was recommended to me on a bunch of my library apps and so forth, so I did decide to check it out. This is based off a traditional holiday story that follows a young couple that have no money and desire to give each other gifts, so they each trade an item in order to get each other a gift, and then when they come together there is a surprise. I don't really want to spoil the original story. I think most people are aware of it. I've read it in many forms many times over. And so this takes the same premise. We follow a young woman who has just gotten married and she wants to get a gift for her spouse, and so she agrees to trade something with this strange woman she meets at her diner in order to get her husband a gift. They exchange gifts, there is a twist and a turn to the story, and I don't want to spoil more. I would say that in my mind, this story is overhyped. Again, it was kind of the big buzzy holiday thriller story that was recommended to me everywhere, and I found the twist to be underwhelming. Specifically, it just wasn't as tightly plotted as it could have been. When it was first revealed to me, I had to reread the ending because I thought the author had made a connection that they didn't, and it's one of these times where reading the book, I had opinions and thought, well, this story's okay, but it would have been so much smarter if the author had done this and this in the narrative, and they didn't. So when I can so specifically criticize a certain part of the plot and recognize the fact that the author could have made such a smart, tight story and chose not to, just makes the ending feel very sloppy to me. So personally, I feel this one is overrated. It wasn't bad. I had a fun time with it until I got to the ending, which I found a little bit disappointing. And I think it was an hour on audio, so I flew through it, but it was pretty forgettable, if I'm honest. Next, I have to talk about a mystery series that I became obsessed with, and I'd love to do further coverage on my channel because I think I read about 5 books in this series over the past few weeks, but I'm only going to talk about a few of them here. So that is the Three Pines series by Louise Penny, who is a Canadian author. These stories are all, for the most part, set around this small Quebecois Canadian town, which is the French part of Canada. We follow this detective who is this brilliant, wise man, and you follow him through different cases. The story itself is that perfect balance between being a little bit quaint and cozy. A lot of the stories, but not all of them, take place around the holidays and Christmas, and so you have that cold weather setting and so forth. And there's just, again, a coziness to this small French town where they're often spending time at the bistro or the bookshop, and one of the side characters is this brilliant artist. And so you have these really rich characters within the story, but there's also a darkness to the stories that really, for me, it makes them work in a way that so many other cozy mysteries don't. When you just have a bunch of grandmothers like knitting sweaters as they solve mysteries, it just doesn't always work for me. So this one kind of walked that line in a way that really appealed to someone like me who likes a little bit of darkness to the story. The fact is that murders are gruesome and dark in how they are done, and definitely the story doesn't glorify those parts, but it doesn't shy away from the darkness of humanity. So that's what I like, is it's not the bloody descriptions of the crime scene, but instead it deals with the darkness within someone's heart, and you have a lot of psychological discussions among the characters as we're trying to analyze what type of person would do such a crime. So as I mentioned, I actually read several of these stories, and I do plan to do some kind of larger coverage here, but I want to point out 2 stories today that I really loved. The first novel was The Madness of Crowds, and this is set in a post-pandemic world. It's kind of set in a different version where the pandemic had truly just gone away once there were vaccines available. So it kind of reimagines a truly optimistic future in a way that we didn't necessarily get, but it makes for an interesting premise and setup to the story. Within the story, there is this statistician, this professor who comes to deliver this good news and just give hope to people in a way who are looking to try to figure out how to rebuild the economy, their homes, their lives. However, there is some really ugliness to what they are suggesting in terms of what governments should regulate and what should be done in order to move forward and help our economy grow. And so it's very calculating, and within the story there is an attack on this person, and so the detective has to figure out who is behind it while still grappling with their own moralities and ethics surrounding their feelings towards this woman. This book, as I mentioned, is really heavy in terms of tone. It does eventually give away what the thing is, but it's revealed late enough in the story that I don't want to spoil it here. Instead, I really like the discussions essentially surrounding the importance and value of human life. Again, I think it's just a really good book to talk about post-pandemic, regardless of where people fall on the sides of it. It's really, in my mind, a book that is meant to bring people together, and it definitely was both a harrowing story and a story with hope all at the same time for me. So I loved it. It was definitely one of my favorites in the entire series. Highly recommend. And the other novel I want to highlight here is Glass Houses, also of course by Louise Penny. And in this story, it's actually set at the beginning. It is taking place on Halloween and then follows into November afterwards. And right at the beginning of the story, there is this man who shows up all dressed in black with this hat. He says nothing and he just stands in the town and stares. And it's a story and a premise that I remember reading the back at the library and thinking, I do not understand what this story is about. I have to read it because I don't get what is happening, and it is slowly revealed to the reader. It is a case where I do feel that you want to again go in and experience it for yourself, because it's not immediately revealed who that man is, so I do think you could just have to go in and check it out. But once again, it's a dark story that deals again with humanity and the darkness of that, and you have this, just again, like this feeling of cold and isolation in the winter of Canada is part of the story, and the question of who this man is and the history that the author pulls from real life is fascinating. Obviously, the author took a couple of liberties in terms of reimagining this character, but I thought it was just really brilliant, really smart, and covering a topic that I'd never heard about in a really interesting way. So if you can't tell, I love this author's work. I love the stories. The characters are rich and well developed. I love to see them with their flaws. They are not all perfect characters, but definitely have their failings, which you see along the way if you follow the course of the series, and the writing is beautiful. I really recommend this series. Personally, I think the later books in the series are a little bit stronger, which is why again I want to do kind of a more of a series review, but I'd like to read more of the books before preparing that. So if you've read Louise Penny before, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Highly recommend this author's work, and those are some of my favorite places to start. You can definitely jump in anywhere in the series. There is character development that happens obviously chronologically, but from my opinion, I just encourage you to jump in wherever it sounds good, and then once you're hooked in, you'll just read everything that comes before and after like I'm doing. And finally, I read The Fright Before Christmas, and this is a short nonfiction piece that follows the history of Christmas, specifically focusing on the creepier aspects of the holiday. So as I mentioned, this book is incredibly short. I did it as an audio because it was available for review, and I'm glad it wasn't any longer, because while I found the book to be interesting, I don't think it could have been justified to be a lot longer than it was, because I think there's only so much to tackle. So the story starts out with focusing on some of the non-Christian background to the holiday and really how it came to be. Some of it I already knew, and then it goes on to highlight some of the creepier aspects of the holidays, particularly things like Krampus and so forth. And again, a lot of it was things I already knew, but it was enjoyable to kind of have it rehash, learn a few new tidbits along the way. I was really happy that they made a reference to the Office episode, and that definitely put a smile on my face. So kind of a fun pop culture discussion about holidays in a way that again I think will appeal to someone more like myself, who is more interested in the creatures of Christmas rather than the sweeter elements to it. So I thought that was kind of a fun book, easy read, flew through it, and again, maybe something you want to pick up if you're just looking for something fun, or maybe something like a Christmas gift for next year. I know I'm kind of late with this video here, giving you all these holiday recommendations a couple days after Christmas. Sorry about that, but it happened. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself, either this year, or I understand if you want to wait till next year, because again, a lot of these books are Christmas and wintry themed, and while I love reading these kind of books in the month of December, I'll be honest, once we move on to January and February, I start to look towards the hope or inkling of spring eventually coming to Canada. And so I probably won't read a whole lot more of these books until next Christmas comes around again. But if you enjoy these kind of books, I'd love to hear about your favorite dark Christmassy story. Don't forget, I've done several videos before recommending Christmas books in recent years, so I'll link those down below. And if you want to stick around and subscribe, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy, and other dark things. If you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. You can help out this video with a big thumbs up, or dropping a comment, something Christmassy or wintry like a snowflake or a snowman. And otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Hope you're having a good week. Okay, bye.